Okay, everyone here is for the Third Reich tour, I think?
Yeah.
Should we have everyone? Okay. Now, it was an arson attack, and the man arrested and blamed and executed for this fire was a Dutch communist called MygrationNations. But they are passed in Germany in March 23rd, 1933. Hitler can't arrest without trial. He becomes the dictator of Germany and he never rescinds these powers. This building is burnt down. But did MygrationNations start these fires? Well, we will never truly know. We're not in East Berlin anymore, right? Which was the Soviet sector. We're in West Berlin, to be precise, in the former British sector. Bless you. Now, why did they build it in the British sector? Well, there are two reasons. First, just like the photo, they want a physical reminder for the Western Allies, we won the war for you. And what we have here is the unknown soldier up here. Now, look at his hand, he is holding back fascism. That's the symbology, that's not a word, that's the symbolism. Now, can you see the size of his hand? Bigger than his head. Now, this is a common communist motif because, of course, they are workers. They are a cog in a chain. They don't need big brains. They're not individuals. They're workers. This is, of course, another memorial here. This is called the Memorial to the Homosexual Victims of the Holocaust. Perhaps a group we don't think about too much when we think of the Holocaust. Because we need to remember that 100,000 homosexual men that were murdered by the Nazis. And what makes that worth mentioning, perhaps more than other groups, is how they were denounced. They were denounced by their friends and their family and their work colleagues. Now this really gets at the heart of how dictatorships work. They work by manipulating and playing on people's fears. And when you do that, like I argued, human beings behave in very predictable ways actually. And they are compliant with whatever they are told. Now this really, like I said, gets as to how dictatorships work. You know, you think about it. Say for instance, this is 1930s Germany. I'm working in Berlin, I live alone. I live next to a man who I happen to think it's gay, but like most people, it doesn't affect my life at all. You know, good luck to him and all that nonsense. But the Nazis come to power, they make it very clear that you need to denounce people who are homosexual. But I don't want to interfere in this man's life, it's none of my business, but I'm terrified of the repercussions. So I prevaricate, I hesitate, I don't know what to do. 3 weeks later, for instance, I come home, the apartment next door is empty. 2 weeks later in the middle of the night, there's a knock on my door. Of course, it's an SS soldier. He asks me, why didn't you tell us about this man? Come with us. So people would denounce their friends and their family and their relatives because they were afraid it would happen to them. Killed or be killed, right? This is the group of people who survive the least. There are far more Jewish and, say, Slavic survivors and Roma and Sinti survivors than there are homosexual men. Not only because they're abused by the SS guards, sexually abused as well, they are also, and this is really hard for us to believe, they're also abused by the fellow prisoners. Now we need to bear in mind this was a period where homosexuality was far less accepted. You know, it still isn't fully accepted now in most societies, is it really? But back then, much more a patriarchal society. The Nazis and a lot of nationalist groups believe in eugenics, the idea that you can breed a super race of human beings. So if the white Northern European Aryans just had sex with each other, their race would be strong, white. Little did they know anything about genetics. Now the idea that you can breed a super race of human beings is so patently absurd, it's amazing that they ever believe this nonsense. Actually, there's no graffiti here, there's no kind of swastikas or horrible taggings, because there is a very expensive coating here which doesn't allow graffiti to stick. Now the company employed to do this was called De Gusse. Now some Swiss journalists did some investigating when they were building this in 2003 and 4, and they found out that De Gusse was a subsidiary company of De Gesch during the Second World War. Now De Gesch were the company who supplied the concentration camps with Zyklonby gas.
Gosh.
The same company that is putting anti-graffiti coating on a Jewish Holocaust memorial for killing the Jews 80 years ago. You can imagine when the newspapers got hold of this, there was a field day. Now the PR, the company wanted to avoid the bad PR, so they did it for free, because they'd already done half of it. That cost them 1.34 million euros.
Oh my God.
Welcome to the Nazi Sandpit. This is where the Nazi children used to play and make their sand castles. I'm joking, of course. Now, Heinrich Himmler, the man in charge of the SS, his most loyal Nazi, really. He decides to portray Adolf Hitler because he realizes that there is not a chance that he can win the war. So he decides to try and liaise with the Americans. The Americans. Sorry about that. Is the big lie. Now, Joseph Goebbels says if you say something over and over and over and over again, someone will believe it, right? Thing of word association, it might not happen overnight, in a couple of days or a couple of weeks, maybe not in a couple of years. But if you imagine if the German people are bombarded with newspapers and radio programs saying Jew, degenerate, this Jewish conspiracy, eventually by word association they'll be worn down that they actually believe this. It's really simple, it works all the time. All 4 of these men commit suicide, and let's remind you of a few things that kind of affirm how hypocritical they were. Adolf Hitler, an Austrian brown-haired, brown-eyed man who never worked. Joseph Goebbels, partially disabled, effeminate intellectual. Hermann Göring, kind of only really in it for the power, the money, and the fame. And then, of course, Heinrich Himmler, the man who does the worst thing ultimately by betraying Hitler. What I'm trying to suggest is that the amount of hypocrisy in these 4 men is astounding. And you can see in some of the things that they have done, if they weren't at the very top of the pile, who knows, maybe they would have ended up in concentration camps for being disabled or for being work shy.